Spain, US, and Canada. With us today, our special guest, Yuri van Geest. Yuri works for the Future Council of the World Economic Forum on Quantum Tech and Digital Platforms and Ecosystems. Good afternoon to you in Holland, Yuri. It is so good to talk to you again since last week that we met in Buenos Aires. How are you?
I'm good. What about you?
I'm good too. Yes, I'm good too. Thank you.
Good to hear.
Thank you very much for joining us, Yuri, today. You're an expert in many topics. One of them is disruption. As we speak, the coronavirus is disrupting us in a big way across all levels, socially, economically, and politically, across all industries around the world at a super fast pace. What is your perspective on this matter, and where do you think are we heading to?
Yeah, well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I hope to inform you based on facts and rationality, and to inspire you a little bit and to help you today. My take on the virus is I've been following this for 7 weeks now, mid-January, so 2 months. Yeah, it's pretty bad because it's a combination of a high infection rate and pretty high death ratio. And there are 2 variants of the virus right now. We don't know how it will mutate in the summer and afterwards. In Holland right now, it's pretty bad. It's ramping up like Italy, but a bit slower, but pretty bad because people are overwhelmed in Europe as a whole. They are not prepared for viruses like this. So that means a reactive mode, linear thinking. There's some scarcity of healthcare materials likely to happen in the next week already. People are diverse in terms of how they deal with it, countries. Some do lockdown, some do herd immunity to sort of manage control of the virus. I do believe it will have a significant impact, not just medically, but there are rates like 50%, 60% of the population might get infected over time in a controlled or uncontrolled fashion. That is pretty awful if you think about it, because if you take a death ratio of 1%, or let's say in some cases 4%, some countries, then you end up in a terrible place. But there is some hope. We might have a vaccine, but it takes at least a year. So I think we are in for a lot of trouble, a few years. It will be a few cycles, few waves of the virus, like in the last pandemics, the last few centuries. So I think we won't be able to control it in the first wave. We are in the first wave right now. The economic impact will be 16 trillion, says Ray Dalio, I think yesterday. So I think that's pretty much, in line with the predictions by McKinsey and Sequoia and Goldman Sachs. There will be a significant ripple effects, not just the supply chain right now from China, because of the Fortune 1000 companies, 10% has a strong link to the Wuhan region as supplier, a Tier 1 relationship, and 90% has a Tier 2 relationship in the supply chain with China. So the impact will be felt in the next few months already, and then you have ripple effects because some organizations are too much leveraged in terms of debt, and there's also a significant drop in demand. For example, in my own business, it's like 90% is gone in 2 weeks. 90%, 90. That this applies to most of my close friends or let's say network.
Mm-hmm.
So this is pretty significant. So expect a lot of bankruptcies. Expect the banks will be in trouble as a result of that. I expect also a crisis in Europe because tensions between North and South. The good news is that there are significant financial investments right now, also in Holland and Europe, in the US. I'm not sure if it will have a long-term impact. It will have a positive short-term impact to avoid bankruptcies, to have better liquidity, a better cash flow. But the question is, how sustainable is this, right? For how long can we continue this? I believe we are into a phase of at least 2 years to deal with this. I think we move into a depression, not the recession. I think we are close to 1929 in terms of impact. But we will get through this. There's a lot of upsides after this, but it will be very intense in my view.
Yeah, thank you. Despite the fact of coronavirus, last week when we were discussing this, you mentioned that you were foreseeing a crisis coming. Why is that?
Yeah, well, not like this, of course.
Of course.
I didn't. I took pandemics into account as a possibility, but when it happens, you never know, right? So, I did expect a financial downturn 2 years ago already, because there's a cycle of 10 years for the last 40 years, and so we have printed too much money, and we can see that already in the last few years, the stock market bubbles, the real estate bubbles, the lending bubbles, globally, not just in the US or Europe or China or Japan, but basically globally. Now it's deleveraged, and most people have predicted this. They're not just, let's say, me, but based on analysis by Ray Dalio or Nassim Taleb, or many people were warning about this in the last 2 years already.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said before. You said you believe this is the first wave out of 3 waves of the coronavirus development. How serious this could get? Yeah,
nobody knows, but there are a lot of uncertainties in the virus itself. It's a known virus in a way, but it's also new. It's a combination of both. So we don't know how it will mutate and if there will be jumps towards a better variant or worse. Well, we don't know. But what's likely to happen that we cannot control it fully, right? Like even in China or in Hong Kong today, we see a small increase again in Hong Kong after a very good few weeks of containment. So ideally, we have a lockdown globally for a month in parallel. That's a way to solve it. We won't be able to do that for many reasons, unfortunately. Maybe we will, but I think it won't happen. That's why I'm saying we are seeing waves, just like in 1918. We had 3 waves. I think we'll have at least 2 waves, at least, probably more in this case, because we are not aligned in our policies at the same time. And sometimes we have a different approach. Like in Holland, they say, okay, we make a lot of people sick, they become immune, and then we can save the elderly. Right? That's a strategy, but it means that it will be active for at least 5 to 10 years, right? Because you have to have immunity for 60% of the population. It takes that long if you want to control it, to manage it, right?
Yeah.
So that means whatever in my view, whatever you do, if you do a lockdown or controlled immunity, herd immunity, in any scenario, you will have cycles, or likely to have, because you have inbound people traveling. You might have missed some people in the previous wave, right? So it's really hard to lock it down in just one wave.
Yeah, we are seeing in news in the media saying that China has already found a cure. Can you confirm whether this is true? And if not, when can we expect a vaccine to address this virus?
Okay, let's see. I didn't have the confirmation yet from China about the vaccine. So I cannot confirm that. But in any scenario, if we have a vaccine, the time to produce it and to distribute it will be significant. A few months, I have been told a year. in total. So we are not safe in the next year, in my view.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned the total global lockdown for a month or so, at least to contain
that's the ideal solution, but that won't happen for many reasons.
Yeah.
Economic reasons, social reasons, political reasons.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to ask you about that. How do you see leadership in government between Eastern countries and Western countries right now? And what else could be done at this present time? Are you seeing collaboration?
Well, there's more collaboration also in Europe. Yeah, I think the Asian countries are more decisive, more top-down, more controlling. They are more collectivistic in culture and nature. So in that sense, they have advantage. So fast top-down decision-making and execution and alignment by most of the population, and they use different technologies to enforce that. I think it's good, right? So Face ID, QR codes, scanning your face, temperature, to see if you are sick, like Argentina is doing as well at the airport already last week. That's really powerful in my view. To use drones for crowd control. Yeah, you can use VR or for education or to communicate with people. And yeah, they are applying nano coatings of titanium dioxide to deflect any virus or bacteria in the subways, right? These are layers to deflect any water, dirt, or virus or bacteria. There are many ways to help sort of control the expansion rate, right, of infections. And the Asian countries, not just China, but also Hong Kong, Singapore, they are they are faster to implement these measures. And I think we should copy that to a certain degree, right? We are in a unique situation. It calls for unique leadership, unique measures, unique ways of decision making. This is the new context, right?
Of course.
In the West, I see more hesitation, more denial, more reactive, more linear responses. I think we should be more. I think we should apply the precautionary principle in the Western world relative to the Asian countries.
Speaking about Asian countries and Asian culture, you know, they're saying that crises are opportunities in disguise. Where do you see these opportunities right now and moving forward?
Well, what I believe is that we are entering a fundamental shift, right, in society, economics. More than 10 years ago, first of all, it's more global. It's a deeper pain. And we have to let go of outdated thinking and frameworks and perspectives. So I think this will be a catalyst to speed up the transition to a more ecological and social and conscious world. This includes leaders, but also institutions, basically our species, right? I strongly believe that. There are already a lot of cues, bottom up by new values, by Gen Z, millennials, what's happening in terms of the soil, the groundswell of the earth, right? These are already embodying a more ecological, social, and conscious way of living and working and being. And then you have the technology, right? We're going to talk about it later on.
Yeah.
Technology is also allowing us to have a more organic way to deal with the nature, ourselves, and the universe. So we move away from mechanistic technologies to living technologies. So organic technologies that are in line with the principles of nature and evolution and ecology. So we don't do damage to the earth. So from a technological point of view, we see the same dynamic, right, becoming more significant. So I see this whole crisis, the pandemic plus the financial economical crisis, as a catalyst to move to a better world in the next 5 years, 10 years.
I've heard you say that last week when we met in person, last week in Buenos Aires. You said the new world is arising. So these are all the examples that you're meaning by that, right?
Yeah. So in practice, biomimicry, yes, right? Brain-computer interface, only if it's organic, right? So if you have adaptive, evolving technologies that are regenerative, like nature, that are not damaging to nature or to the universe or to people, these will flourish, right? Quantum, photonics, particular kinds of nanotechnology, CRISPR in particular aspects, these become more important over time. Or let's say new sources of energy, which are in line with nature and the universe, like quantum tunneling energy, right? Free energy from the universe. We talked about that last week as well. These become more significant to lead us to a better world.
Yeah, the problem is, or the limitation I see, is that this is not the same for developed countries versus
Yes.
emerging markets or geographies. How do you see this situation?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question because it's both plus and minus. The good side is that technology is demonetizing and democratizing. So even, let's say, less developed countries are able to join the usage of new technologies to decentralize production and democratize. And it's cheaper, right? So that's a good thing. The downside is that most technologies have network effects and scale and scope effects, winner takes all effects, and not all, but some, which means that the most advanced countries like China or US and some others might benefit more than other countries, and there will be a centralizing force. Besides that, with each technology the last 10,000 years, there's always there are two choices. One is to control people more top down, and the other is to empower people. So to centralize or decentralize. This becomes more significant today than, let's say, 10 years ago, because the impact of our upcoming technologies, like quantum computing, quantum AI, blockchain, of course, the impact becomes more significant relative to, let's say, 20 or 50 years ago, in terms of the implications of positive or negative technology usage, for business reasons, for political reasons, and for us citizens.
Right. Let's move on to leadership, right? Since all these audience are business leaders, what set of skills you need, and what advice can you give us at this moment?
Yeah, but we are in the crisis, as we all know, so it makes top-down leadership more important, because leadership is contextual, contingent, depending on the environment. In the past, it used to be top-down leadership, then a little bit more horizontal leadership. In the last 20 years, because of the complexity and the speed of change in the environment, so leadership became a little bit more open, more vulnerable, asking questions, enabling, facilitating authentic, purpose-driven leadership, building horizontal ecosystems inside and outside your organizations. So it's a more facilitating leadership. But in this case, I think we got to move back a little bit more to a synthesis of both vertical and horizontal leadership. So best of both worlds from the past, because the complexity of the virus, for example, and the financial crisis necessitates a horizontal leadership at first, where you ask a lot of questions to key experts. Let's say the Chinese way, a meritocracy based on key experts. And then at the same time, you have to be faster in your decisions. So you disagree, but you commit and you execute because of the speed or the necessity of the virus, right? You cannot negotiate for too long. It's just because it's exponential in nature. And you have to, so I think that's a key dynamic at play. Also, leaders have to become more aware of the exponential nature of problems and the exponential nature of solutions. So network effects, network theory, complexity, complex systems need to be a part of your mindset. Think in terms of being anti-fragile, and Nassim Taleb. How can you benefit from black swan events or from chaos, like right now? So that means simplicity, building up Slack, decentralization. All these principles to be anti-fragile needs to be part of your framework as a leader. You have to become more intuitive besides being data-driven, because we don't have all the data points. Think about the virus, and you still have to make a decision. So to make it very practical, in terms of the scenario building around the virus or the financial crisis, I think we have to apply more the precautionary principle instead of based on reactive principle or based on progressive insights, because the downsides of a wrong scenario are now bigger than trying to, if you respond too late, the downsides are bigger, right? As we can see in Europe, right? It's reactive leadership. They don't anticipate exponential growth, or they realize it too late, and then the measures are too light. And with big problems, you sometimes have to be very bold, like Chinese, and decisive, or Singapore, to stabilize it, to control it. And I think that's lacking in most Western leaders today, in my view.
I want to say to everyone connected right now that, of course, your audio is off. If you would like to send questions, the chat room is open, and I'm going to shift between my questions to Yuri and the ones that are coming in the chat room. For instance, I'm going to ask you what do you think about Latin America? Maybe if I extend non-development geographies, I think that we have some advantages: warm climate, creative people, and experience in different crises. What do you think about that?
So can you rephrase the question one more time?
Yeah. The person says we have some advantages: warm climate, well, until winter season is coming, at least as in South America, creative people, flexibility, and experience in different crises, economic and financial crisis mostly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And political.
So this flexibility and having experience in the past, how do you see this could be a leverage for us or not?
Yes, I fully agree. Good point. Great question. Kudos. Look at Africa with the Ebola, other viruses, right? They are more prepared for this pandemic in a way. They are not prepared in terms of healthcare systems and let's say the ecosystem of healthcare as such, but they, in their mindset, they are more prepared based on the last decades, right? The same applies to let's say South America in the past because of different crises, political, economical, recent or a little bit further down the road. I think you are more prepared, more anti-fragile in mindset. So that's why I explained why Argentina last week had implemented better measures already than, let's say, Holland 2-3 weeks more down the road of the virus. So it shows that South America is more agile, more decisive, making bolder moves, more courageous, in my view. And I think that's the result of the previous crisis. Yeah, so I agree.
Yeah, the problem that we have in this latitude is social vulnerability, poverty.
Yes.
That's a huge problem, a potential problem. Another question. Let's go to the US. What is your take on Trump's announcement of treatment with hydroxychloroquine?
Yeah, it might work. There are many, let's say, already existing medicine to deal with other diseases that can be applied for this particular virus, but there's no certainty yet. There's no certainty about the efficacy. So we are testing it also in Holland. So I don't know anything about the effectiveness.
All right. Let's go to an industry-specific question. Airlines, hotels, entertainment, gastronomy. These are all industries being affected in a big impact right now, of course. So how do you see these industries being reinvented themselves?
How they are being impacted? Yeah, well, I think we are entering a value shift, right? Work becomes more digital, probably for the long term. If you look at Zoom and Slack and other key players. So we are increasingly able to digitize our work, our lives, out of necessity right now, but maybe also for climate reasons. So I think there will be a significant shift, and I think we will travel a little bit less later after the crisis. Not like to zero, but let's say less than in the last few years. I think that there would be a fundamental shift. But in terms of going out and restaurants, I think it will recuperate after the crisis.
After the crisis, yes.
Yeah,
At least
but I think I think there will be more awareness. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we are moving to a more decentralized world, right? People become more self-sufficient because they don't want to be dependent upon China, for example, too much. They want to have more global supply chain with slack built, redundancy built in. They want to produce more things locally, right, as a backup system for crisis, to become more anti-fragile. So that this will impact food production, food consumption, but also transport, logistics, flights. The circular economy will get a boost. So I think this is the key catalyst to help start this transition. Yeah.
All right. Speaking about anti-fragility, there's a question from Panama coming saying, how do you see the opportunities in this country, Panama, as a logistic hub? More than 170 multinational headquarters, ports, airports, and the warm climate all year. Do you see this as a good leverage for this specific market?
Oof, that's a good question. It reminds me of Rotterdam, right? With key, let's say, logistical hub. The impact will be significant, right? As we all understand, massive this year and next year. After that, I believe global supply chains will change anyway because of 3D and 4D printing and nano molecular assembly long-term in the next 10, 20 years. But that means we can produce more decentralized over time. So if you combine that with circular economy, right? So over time, the global supply chains will be impacted significantly. There will be there will be less need to transport finalized products. You might say some commodities or half products might still be shipped, but if you think about it long term, it will increasingly become more decentralized because of the convergence of different technologies. So nanotechnology, 3D and 4D printing, allow and the circular economy and sustainability, they will allow us to produce more in a decentralized fashion. So in terms of long term for Panama, I would say, you have to move away from moving atoms and trying to produce them more.
All right.
So Rotterdam is doing the same thing, right? That they are moving away from an enabling function to an energy hub, decentralized production hub, right? Using 3D and 4D printing,